but nothing happened, which I thought was kind of funny. So, whoever's done that is a
Was
good
that
sense
you,
of
Neil?
humour.
Very good. Okay.
All right, so look, we won't keep you for too long because you've been sitting here talking to listening to a whole lot of people, but I think there are some things that we need to go through just to clarify or to provide some answers on some of the questions that have been raised in the submissions today, and also to provide you with some other information which we've got as a result of some of the risks that are around a couple of the potential sites. And as I said before, it also provides you the opportunity to ask us any questions that you may have, some of which we may be able to answer today, and I've got the WISE team around me to be able to answer those specific questions, but also additionally gives you the ability to ask us anything and us to go away and get that information for your deliberations tomorrow. So in starting, I guess, I start off thinking of our friend Sir Tim Shadbolt, Your Worship, who, before he got his job in Southland, I think his catch cry was, "I don't care where, I just want to be mayor." At the moment, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't care where, I just want to be there. Quite literally, that's how I feel. I don't have, myself personally, and us as officers, we don't have an opinion on which one of these sites we want to be at for our office accommodation. Frankly, we don't care. It's not quite fair. We're ratepayers, of course we care, we have a view the same as anybody, but any of these sites, any of the four potentials that you put forward, will be able to provide the opportunity that we do care about, which is getting us all together as a team and getting the efficiencies that we need and that we can see that we need for this organisation to move forward. So that's not helping you too much, because really, frankly, we don't mind too much about the option. Each of the options have pros and cons, and you've been through that in your consultation document. We can talk about any of those that you wish. You can ask us questions about any of those that you wish if you want to get more clarification or go through them again. The only thing the only thing I would say on that is that, in my opinion, and it is my opinion, doing nothing really isn't an option. So we've got the four options that we've been out to consult with, and I don't need to go over those. The fifth option is essentially status quo, which is not progressing the long-term plan amendment. I say it's not an option because essentially you've employed me and reconfirmed that only recently to run a business which is all about providing efficient and effective infrastructure and services to our community. I've sat here today and heard about our ratepayers talking about priorities and the fact that they prioritise other projects. Frankly, I do too. I prioritise those other projects, but to deliver those projects in an efficient and effective manner, I need my team to be together and to be providing the services for the district. At the moment, in 5 or 6 different locations, frankly, we are limping and we're doing the best that we can, but we are never going to be better. We're going to be staying the way that we are. So that has got a financial cost, and it's got a huge cultural cost. Just recently we've done a staff survey. I spoke about that in my performance review just recently. The most common commentary in that staff survey was from our staff, from our team, was we really miss being together. We want to be together in a building. That was the most common feedback through that staff survey. That is what, more than anything, which is driving our culture, our engagement, and our ability to be able to progress as an organisation. That's before you start getting into the inefficiencies of the current situation. Having 6 different tea rooms, different stairwells, different showers, toilets. When you get into the cost effectiveness of that. But again, the culture is the one thing. You've heard that from submitters today, those that have been in business, about the importance of culture. With a team of 350 odd people, it's central to be able to do those projects which we all hold dear. And we're talking about traffic, we're talking about all those things that have been raised today. We can do that better with better standard of accommodation for us. There was some. I just want to say, from my perspective as well, it's not about this room. With respect, this room, this is where you make the decisions, and this is a really important room. And I do agree with some of the submitters that this room doesn't function the best that it can. And if you go around and look at other councils around the country, you will see many examples where rooms like this can function well and people can be involved in democracy. But for me, the important bit isn't this room. The important bit is the back of house stuff. It's about the 180 people who are implementing the decisions that you make and implementing them well. People have talked about the fact that the service centre appears to be working and working well. They're kind of right. It is working well, but again, it's limping. And the reason I say that is that at the moment in the service centre, Lisa's staff, she's got a staff of customer service agents and telephonists sitting there. They are doing the best that they can. However, as soon as somebody wants something more than the basic question that they can answer, what has to happen? Somebody has to jump into a car or onto their feet, run down to that service centre and fill that. Quite frankly, what that's meant is that we've gone away from being able to react to what our customers want. No longer can someone walk into our customer service centre and ask about a planning matter or about a dog matter. They have to make an appointment and come back in 3 to 5 days when the officer can be there at that particular time. I hate that. That's not the service that I think we should be offering to our communities. We should be offering it like this. But we can't do that without those people there to be able to come down and answer those questions. I compare that to where we were at Lake Terrace previously, and it's completely different. And you'd know that. You were up and down in those buildings all the time, and you would have seen the staff down at the customer service desk answering questions with the public. It is not happening now. So yes, it's working if you're going to go and pay a parking ticket, but it's not working if you want that next. There you go. It's not working if you want that next level. And frankly, most people aren't paying parking tickets in the customer service centre now anyway. They're doing it online. So few, I don't know what the stats are, but so few of our rate payers now are paying their rates in person. It's all done online. So the majority is. So in my opinion, and in our opinion, it is urgent and it does need to happen now. And frankly, I believe that you need to provide us with the tools to be able to transform the business as we've spoken about in the journey that we've started. I started by saying that I didn't care which of the options you pick, and frankly I don't. But there are a couple of elements that we want you to think about in making those decisions. The first one is that the submitters are actually right. This is nothing new. Progressive councils have failed to make these decisions, a decision about offices for at least the last 15 years. So it's something which keeps on coming up, it keeps on getting assessed, and it keeps on getting parked for the very same reasons that you've heard about today, because there's always other projects that are more important, and there are. Again, I agree with that. But the cost of those other projects, or the cost of this project not going ahead to those other projects is huge and unqualified in terms of the cost of those projects. So that's number one. Number two, personally I was quite surprised at the lack of support for lease options in the consultation document. I thought that was going to come out as a favoured option. And we were really surprised at the lack of commercial players who put something forward for us to consider. In fact, I think Philip and myself spoke to probably about eight commercial players through the submission process, most of whom indicated that they were quite keen and were talking and took our spec document and did a lot of work on it. So I was surprised, but I think you've heard from two of them today through Mr. Fisher and Mr. Cooper, which it was surprising, but you heard as even developers them saying that they believe that the lease option wasn't good for whatever reason. There was a question today about green buildings. I'll just say that in your specs it's going to be a 5-star green building wherever you build it, and whether or not you build it or it's leased. So that is taken care of in the specs that you've already approved. There was a question about should the building be in Taupo or Mangakino. It has to be or Turangi. It has to be in Taupo, frankly. Our staff, 180 staff that will be in this building, reside in Taupo. To change that and to change their primary place of work would require me to renegotiate the contracts with each of those people, because each of their contracts has Taupo town as their primary place of work. That would be at a huge significant cost. It wouldn't come free. It would be a huge significant cost and would have I dare say, the opposite effect that you would be wanting and what we're trying to achieve in terms of the culture growth of the organisation, therefore the efficiencies. The town centre, putting the office in the town centre is something, and I think some of the submitters talked about the district plan requirements, and then they're quite right. You as a council went through a very robust process back in 2010 through to 2015, which I actually personally led out, where we spent many hundreds of thousands of dollars in time in the Environment Court fighting our very good ratepayers, and it was our past mayor as an example, not the one that was in today, but Mr. Stent, and a group of other people, which was all about setting up a district plan that would required officers to go into the town centre. The Environment Court heard that and they ruled on that and said, yes, we believe that all officers of scale should be in the town centre. The reason being, and all the evidence that the Environment Court heard, and they heard from economists and urban designers and a whole raft of people, and the Environment Court said, look, office activities are central to the functioning of a town centre. They are no different to retail, any other type of activity, and in fact, from a whole lot of environmental reasons, such as parking, dare I say it, it actually makes sense to accumulate like activities together, because that then provides the best opportunities for things like public transport and pooling of resourcing, etc. So this is, I guess I'd liken it to, in a macro sense, the planning of Auckland versus the planning of other cities of a similar scale. Auckland over time has gone out and bigger, and that actually creates the traffic issues that you create, versus something like Wellington, which is nice and tight. It means that you can then provide the public transport and everything. In a smaller scale, our CBD is no different. By keeping it tight, by dealing with the parking, it actually creates a solution to the parking in itself, because you've created that scale. On that, we have had, and you know that we're going through the transportation strategy at the moment, and we've had the consultants as part of that, the ABLI group, do a couple of pages which we've shared with you in the on Diligent, to talk about what the impact of the different sites would be on the parking and where the transportation issues are going. Philip can talk to that a little bit more once I've finally shut up. So that will come very soon. And then the other one that I'd just like to point out would be Lake Terrace site does provide some unique planning constraints. It's connected with that town centre and the plan changes I've talked about. So likewise, we've had Katrina Eagles, who's here today, provide us with a report which is also on your Diligent about the process and risks associated with that Lake Terrace site. I think it's fair to say that shows that it's not unable to happen, and hence it's an option, the same as the domain is not unable to happen. There's processes that needs to be undertaken. But Katrina's here who can answer any questions, and in fact after I finish she can go through in very general terms her report to you. Almost getting to the end. Cost, a few of the submitters talked about the costs that the proposals put forward. On that, all I'd say is that they've come straight from a quantity surveyor. And they have included the IL4 for the whole building, so that puts it more expensive than what a standard build would be. And to be fair, they are designed around a landmark building, and Mr. Cooper talked about the design of these things. That is what they're designed around. I'm not going to shy away from that, because that's what you asked for, and that's what you asked for because initially we were looking at Tongariro Domain, which had to be a landmark building. We then you decided quite consciously that you would compare apples with apples on those different sites. I can tell you now that the cost to build whoever does it won't be what that QS has said. It'll be different to that because it'll change as you get to the detailed design. So at the moment there's a whole lot of contingency built into that. I think 30%, 50% in places. There's contingency built into that costing because at the moment we simply don't know. So it's a I won't say worst case, but it's a normal process that you go through. As we go through the value engineering process, that those costs will get more defined and more changed. But the important thing is that you're comparing apples with apples across those 4 sites so that you've got a really good starting point. Finances, you heard a couple of submitters talk about our finances and in a macro sense and where council's at. I've let Neil answer any questions you've got on that, as he is the expert in that area, but in general terms I'd say, look, we're not in dire straits. You get the monthly reports, you know where our finances are, you know where our debt levels are. Our net debt at the moment is sitting around about $21 million. It's actually, when you look at our peers around the country, we're actually doing very, very well, and I think that's evidenced by our Standard & Poor's rating, which is the highest or one of the highest in any council, equal highest in the country. So there is no way that you can say that we're financially strapped, we can afford this project and the other projects that people have been talking about. And then the last one I just want to talk about is procurement. You've had a couple of people talk about procurement, about whether it's a lease to own, how we partner with the private sector, how we do that. Essentially, when you make a decision about where we're going, if your chosen option was one of the council-owned sites, different if it's a lease option, we obviously then enter into discussions with the property owner. if one of your options, or your option is one of the council-owned sites, we then work out with you about the procurement, and there's a whole raft of different options there. We've had some advice from Audit New Zealand around that already, but essentially that advice was procurement's a really important element of whatever you do. You should invest in some really good advice going forward from procurement specialists. So that would be the next step once you've made a decision on where you want to go. Really, there were a whole lot of other items that people talked about and wanted you to consider in the submissions, and in particular issues around tūrangi. All I'd say on that is that because you didn't include any of those issues into your LTP amendment, in law you can't consider them here. Okay, so you cannot now add anything else other than the building and the museum. Those are the two elements that you've been out to consult with. For anything else that you want to do, then it has to be either in your annual planning process, another long-term plan amendment, or wait for the next long-term plan. You can't now add something additional into this amendment. And likewise, the only options that you can pick are the 4 options that you've consulted on. You can't add anything else. There's actually 5 options, because the 5th option is to do nothing, is to throw the amendment out, which is status quo. So it's the 4 options we consulted on, or do nothing. So legally you cannot now go and add another option. Waira House has been mentioned. Despite the fact Waira House would have the same planning issues that you'll hear from Katrina soon, the more important thing is that under this process you couldn't do that. You would have to essentially restart this process again and go back out and consult, and Hadley's the expert on that who will be able to answer that off for you. Lastly, and it is very much lastly, is the museum. And the only thing that I want to answer off there, because all the information's in front of you and you've been through that, the only thing that I want to answer off is that there were some figures presented to you about our current investment, so the status quo investment in the museum, which were incorrect, so I just wanted to correct that. The actual figures is that we're forecasting your current long-term plan, current and approved long-term plan, slightly over $1 million over the next 10 years for the museum in capital and renewals. So last year we spent, just for example, we spent $132,000 in capital and renewals. So that's not the operating cost, that's not OPEX, that's just doing stuff. It was $132,000. So clearly that is a different figure to what was said today, but that is reality, and it's to say it's slightly over $1 million over that 10-year life of the plan. I'm sure you'll have questions. Hadley, Phil, Neil, myself are all here. Wonder, should we do Katrina? Katrina, do you want to come and just do a 2-minute about
How are we going, councillors? 5% country. So, just bear in
you
mind,
or that?
Not you.
we have got, tomorrow's schedule and the next day.
Yep.
So I'm thinking just where we could take it to now from Mr Green is that councillors will cry on any more information they need overnight.
Yep.
And also we're going to look at all the individual submissions. I urge the councillors to look at them as well, as you have been doing in the last week or so, and to raise those individual submissions tomorrow as we see fit and discuss those.
Yep.
So that would be the order of the day tomorrow. I realise it's 4 o'clock now. How do the councillors feel? Do we want to hear from Katrina? I realise you're busy, Katrina, too. So
I think if we could, Your Worship, if we could just hear from Katrina now, just so that then she doesn't have to sit around tomorrow as well.
When you can ask some questions because you've got limited time tomorrow, correct, Rosie? So perhaps the money side and all that sort of thing, that's okay. Okay, Katrina.
I was waiting to answer questions, but I'm happy to go into my report. I understand you've had it, and I hope you've had a quick chance to read. I was asked to comment on the Mitchell-Dash report memorandum that you had about existing use rights at 72 Lake Terrace,
Right.
and my report, and whether could be an extension gained to those existing use rights. My report details that there is an ability to apply for an extension to the existing use rights, which of course can be considered to have expired in September 2018. That application would need to first establish that the occupation was lawful, and there's quite a lot of work to do in that report.
Sorry. occupation?
The occupation was lawful at the
Lawful,
time
okay.
in 2007, and to
Right.
do that, you've actually got to go from when council first started occupying the site in '66, and at each iteration of the district plan, consider and look as to see whether you were lawful at the time, right through to. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of research, not only in terms, and this isn't just in terms of the building. It's also to do with the scale of the activity that is in there. So you need details of the scale of activity that also occurs. So in order to apply for an extension, you've got to establish that the occupation was lawful in the first place. And then you've got to also determine, in section 10.2, requires a determination that the extension itself would not be contrary to the objectives and policies of the current district plan. And then finally, it would need to include approvals from adversely affected persons. So you could certainly apply for an extension to existing use rights. I do think that there's a couple of risks there, which is that whether you've actually got enough information to prove it, that you were lawfully established in 2007 and since, because there's quite a lot of information that needs to go in to show that. So you need to have enough information, and whether that exists, I don't know, but that's a risk. I do also think in that extension application that an assessment of the objectives and policies of the district plan would show that a building that you're talking of, there was a slip up, would be considered contrary to the business distribution and residential environment objectives and policies of the district plan as they currently stand. And so therefore an extension application may not be granted. And then also that if you don't obtain written approvals from the affected parties, that the extension may not be granted. So on the basis that potentially you don't have existing use rights at 72 Lake Terrace, your other option is to apply for a resource consent. And in applying for that resource consent, often you can say we have existing use rights, but of course you potentially don't have them. And so you can, however, in that application, talk about the historical use of the site and go into the information that's there, and that's really useful information in terms of what has previously occurred on the site, but you can't use it as an authorised baseline under the legislation. So you can use it as background information in your application to show that the new use isn't overly different and it is what people are used to. However, as an office activity, there are some risks at looking at putting an office activity in the residential high density environment. Firstly, the application is not excluded from public notification under the legislation, so there are some provisions that are excluded, such as residential activities in subdivision, and office activity is not excluded, so there is a risk that there would be public notification. And that in terms of when you look at public notification, you've got to look at the effects on the environment and whether they are more than minor in terms of whether notification should occur, and that I think there is a risk in terms of the effects of council now moving out of the town centre to a residential environment, and so those risks being the viability and efficiency of the town centre, economic wellbeing, lack of consolidation, increased travel between businesses, that the effects of council moving out would be considered to be more than minor, and therefore public notification could well occur.
But that's not the work.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Public notification could occur. The thing with public notification is every submitter has an appeal right, and you could end up at appeal. So that no, certainly. Certainly. So the risk is that with public notification comes a longer process with longer delay and increased costs. It also means that if it were to be granted, and we'll talk about the risk of that in a minute, those parties could appeal. And if it helps to talk about the hotel, we had a hearing in December. We are still waiting for a mediator 6 months later. We do not know when that mediation will come. And then we've got to come to a mediated outcome if possible. So in terms of the delay, no, it's not. It was just more the process in terms of the delay. That's all I was referring to in terms of if time is important, the delay that a public notification could in terms of the public notification and an appeal is the delay that could occur in relation to that.
Should I take into account non-affected parties just trying to hold it up,
If it's publicly notified, all parties are entitled to make a submission. You cannot make a vexatious submission or trade competition submission, but all submissions are generally okay.
There's a remit going before local government at the moment, isn't there, regarding submissions
And
on
then,
resource consents?
in terms of the decision as to whether the Commission may grant or refuse, they've got to look at the effects on the immediate environment and effects on the town centre of everyone, of the council moving out. And they've also need to consider in a discretionary activity the objectives and policies of the district plan. As I said, I don't believe that they would be considered to be consistent with the district plan. And in addition, under Schedule 4 of the Act, you are required to look at alternative locations if there are to be significant effects and whether alternative locations have been considered. Yes, you've got to show whether those sites are comparable in that alternatives analysis. I would say that wouldn't be your conclusion. I think your zone is different on Tūwharetoa Street. Your zone is inside the CBD, inside the town centre, so you don't have all of those effects of moving out. You don't have the traffic effects of moving out, and you also would not be contrary to the objectives and policies of the district plan. I think the accessibility, if that's what you're talking about, of council in those two locations would be something that you'd consider, yes. And so if it was approved, there's a risk of a submitter appealing. If it should be declined and as the applicant council wishes to appeal it, you would then end up with a Taupo District Council versus Taupo District Council case.
What is the reputation risk of those
I will let you draw your own conclusions about that.
Councillor Rankin.
It really should never have gone out as an option, and I feel really embarrassed that we did not know this before it became.
So you did know this, and it's quite clear in your
Well, I hadn't observed it. Nobody explained it to me the way I
So what we asked Katrina to do was come and give you the advice the same way that she would for any other client that came along. We did give you this advice, and it is clear in your consultation document as one of the risks of that site, just the same as there's risks for the domain and risk for those other sites. And we spoke about it at length here, because I remember sitting here talking to you about the district plan, town centre environment rules.
The option.
But in no way are we saying it can't happen. It can happen, but there's a process. Absolutely there is, in the same way that there is for the domain, and the same way that there is for some of the other options. So the timeframes are different for each site, and it is dependent on the site that you choose, and therefore the process. There is a way to get to do this, but by no means is it a sure thing, and that's what Katrina's talking about in terms of the risks associated with that. So you did know about it, and Lake Terrace always had to be an option, because it essentially is where you came from. It's Audit New Zealand said you have to put essentially that as an option as well, because it is a fallback option. So you had no choice, and it is achievable. All of those four options are achievable. Absolutely, I remember having a disagreement with Councillor Boddy actually at that time. Absolutely, about that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Christine's shaking her head because probably didn't realise that actual Katrina's eloquently explained it in the elongated version. But certainly I believed I knew it was never going to be absolutely, and we had to put it in there anyway because of the you've got to use the existing facility as an option.
And I think the
Yeah.
to put over it as you go through decision-making processes, why so many people forgot that what's driving those discussions, those thoughts is just think about that as you go through. So it's up to us collectively, us around the table here to make that final decision.
So in the
You guys are just giving us the comment.
consultation document is the disadvantages for Lake Terrace. It says it would contradict the district plan, which directs large-scale office activity to be located in the town centre. And then as a risk, it says a new building would need to be approved under the Resource Management Act with a low likelihood of success, high risk. So that's exactly what we've just said.
High risk, yeah. Thank you, Katrina. Thank you for explaining. Yes, certainly.
So if the council decided that wasn't their preferred option and that land was sold, what can it be sold as?
Accommodation.
It's zoned high density residential, so it certainly could have accommodation. It could have apartments, hotel, etc. So it could have a range of activities that are similar to those around it. Those activities in themselves may still need consent. For example, if they didn't have enough car parking, if they were slightly over height or too close to the boundaries, they would have to go through the same process. But fundamentally, in terms of the objectives and policies, all of those uses, hotels, apartments, etc., would be more likely to be in keeping with the zone provisions and the objectives and policies. And something like car parking, you would go, well, there's lots of established car parking out on the street, so that stuff would be much easier to mitigate. But from a fundamental objectives and policies, it could be used for a wide range of uses that are in keeping with the objectives and policies of the zone and not contrary to the business distribution objectives and policies, which are the ones that really anchor office activities into the CBD and allow for those as accommodation type activities.
Thanks, Katrina. Just to clarify here, Gareth, Katrina's speaking as an external consultant, advising to us, realising she was a previous submitter.
Yep.
So just like that, just minuted perhaps,
Yep.
just so we're clear of that process.
Absolutely. So we did consider conflict and believe that the advice that she's given you at the moment is very much around the district plan.
Yes.
We could have got one of our planners to do it, but obviously they will be if you go down that road, they will be the consenting authority as well.
Right.
But as a planner myself, I can say that I concur with everything that Katrina ever
Thank
says.
you.
Yeah, sure. Sorry to ask that question,
No,
Katrina.
it's quite all
I'd
right.
just
And
like
if,
a minute
if
today,
it,
so it's
if it
quite clear.
assists Chris Fisher, we ran this past him, he didn't consider it to be a conflict of interest. This is purely a planning analysis on that site,
Yeah, cool.
and we didn't consider that to be a conflict.
If someone's not here today, well, obviously no one's here today. Yeah. Cool. Very good. Thank you, Katrina.
You're
Clear
welcome.
and concise there. Councillor Boddy? All right. Well, we can probably get that into deliberations when we start those questions. Hold that question probably, John, till tomorrow, if that's all right. No. Good. Yep.
Your worship, how do you see the deliberations rolling
Yep.
tomorrow?
Well, just while the front bench is here, do we want any more information from them overnight regarding stuff? So, okay, well, Rosie, go Rosie.
I need to know timeframes now, hearing more of that and understanding more about the criteria stuff. I want to know timeframes, if it was to decide, whatever we have to do, how long that's going to take possibly, for all of them. And for me, I can't make that decision overnight. I think we'll take.
Okay.
I don't want to make a decision until I've had time to digest more information.
Sure. Okay, so what was the question? Timeframes on?
Timeframes for the
Yeah.
potential timeframes for the option.
We know that? Yeah.
The other question
You can circulate that, yeah.
was we've had about two other options around those options, which we didn't have. So do we consider them or not?
So which options, sorry?
Lease divide
From Chris? Yep.
and Gary Travis.
Yep. So they are in the lease bundle. So they're different parts of a lease option. So yes, the short answer is yes, you can consider those as part of that what you've already consulted on, because it's an element of leasing.
But I guess what Rosie's asking, if we were
Sure.
Yes, because they're talking lease to own, not lease. So for me,
Yep.
a lease is a lease. Whereas this is just, no,
That's
it's always open.
it's
and
it's
on the offer.
yeah, yeah.
So we haven't gone over that.
Yep. So we can talk about the process for each of the options because that is the same process as a lease because it is the same thing. So we can talk about the different processes and we can do that tomorrow. We'll make a note of that.
Lease to buy.
Because lease was